Hello, I'm Dick Foth, and I'd like to welcome you to Known, stories to make sense of it all. And these stories are what I call walking books, real-life people from different places, different ages, different cultures, and I want to have some conversations with them across disciplines and generations and cultures in order to encourage a kind of knowing, fresh lenses through which to see the world. One of those lenses will be Scripture, or more specifically, Jesus of Nazareth, whose life, I believe, changed the course of the history of the world. So, thanks for listening in. Great to have you with us. You've heard me say this a lot of times on these podcasts, but life is a journey, and it can become cliche-ish, but the truth is life is a journey. It's got its ups and downs, and its sideways, and hills and valleys, and all of that. But one of the core questions in our journeys is, so where do we come from? Where do we come from geographically? Where do we come from ethnically, religiously? Where do we come from philosophically or theologically? All of those points of reference they inform our lives, and they become lenses through which we see the rest of our lives. I took up the challenge last year, and as I put it, spit in the tube and sent it off to find out my ethnic roots. And I go all the way back to, at least they say in my DNA, I go back to like the 1670s or whatever, and I have great-grandparents or great-great-great-great-grandparents. And one of them was 100% Finnish. One of them was 100% Sardinian, that island in the Med. And one of them was 100% Native American. I didn't know all of that. So I have those kinds of DNA roots, but I have other kinds of roots. I have roots that reflect where I was born and brought up, in East Oakland, California, for example, or a stint in India with parents when I was young. This particular conversation we're going to have today talks about one man's trajectory of faith throughout his life to this point. You know I have a bias. When we talk about stories that make sense of it all, I lock my story into this Jewish person. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. Many of my heroes, maybe not most, are Jewish people. You know, Abraham and Moses and David and Jesus of Nazareth and Paul the Apostle. And it isn't because all of them were perfect. Jesus, I believe, was perfect, but the rest of them were flawed like I am. And when I read their stories in Scripture, I find myself in a lot of places. This particular conversation has to do with a young Jewish man. And my sense, because I appreciate Jesus of Nazareth, who was Jewish, I see him as cutting across all ethnicities and all religious structures and all political systems, sort of being being above that. And that's how I see it. But let me share this conversation to show you how my friend Steve Katz sees it. We're sitting in a cabin in the hill country of Texas outside Austin. Good morning, Steve.
Hi, Dick.
Hey, tell our listeners, where are you from originally? Who are you? Give us a little bit of Steve, and I'll jump in along the way.
Sure. I am from the Chicago area, lived in the suburbs, Skokie and Waukegan, and from a Jewish home, went to a conservative synagogue, if that means anything to...
What does that mean?
Yeah. It's kind of the middle-of-the-road Judaism. In other words, we're not too modern and not too traditional. We try to grab from both worlds.
Oh, okay.
And so when everybody else was playing softball after school, I had to go to Hebrew school, which was not too fun, but got through it. You know, had a bar mitzvah at the age of 13 and had 3 kids in my family. My dad's side was pretty orthodox. I was close with that grandmother. My mom's side was very liberal. When I married my wife, who's not Jewish, we went there for breakfast one morning, and my grandfather wanted to give Laura, my wife, a little lesson on Jewish culture, and and it was so funny. We sat down. He said, "Now, Laura, I want to tell you something about what it means to be Jewish and how we live." And he says, "We Jews don't eat pork, only bacon." And it was so funny. Laura and I looked at each other, but it was generally a happy family, a good family. My Orthodox grandmother, died when I was about 17. I started thinking about life and death. So I started thinking a lot about life. I got into Bob Dylan. I was thinking, why are we here? What is life? What is death? Is it make a lot of money, go get drunk at parties? I mean, why are we here? What gives it meaning?
And at that time, Bob Dylan was the man. Bob Dylan, the singer. Is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't in the first wave of, I'm too young to have been into all of Dylan on the first go round, but somehow I discovered him. I think I heard maybe his concert at Bangladesh or something. I don't know what it was.
What years was this been?
Well, this was around 74.
Okay.
70. I mean, probably a year before that, I started discovering him. And I thought, this guy I resonate with this. He's saying it. He's real. He's not pulling any punches. I'm going to be Bob Dylan.
Okay. So.
Yeah. And so I taught myself guitar and harmonica and probably a few other instruments. Stole a few of them from the music shop where I got a job, but I was gonna jump a boxcar and change my name, but instead of hopping on a boxcar and changing his name, Steve kept his name and drove to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. He went there with a fascinating goal: to start studying and then quit. What's that about? Planning to quit before I got there. I thought I needed to go and then quit. That's what he had done in Minnesota.
I see.
But I wound up at the University of Illinois and wasn't too into school. I had a Jewish professor for a rhetoric course, and I remember one day he gave us a Charlie Brown cartoon and wanted us to extemporaneously just kind of analyze what was the message of this cartoon. And I was pretty not into it, and so I was kind of, I don't know if you remember James Joyce, and he wrote a stream of consciousness, no punctuation, no grammar, just kind of let your thoughts flow. Yeah. So I wrote in that style, and I was real critical of him, and I was just all over the map. And he gave me my paper with lots of four-letter words and said, "Get out of here," and "You don't want to be here," and flunked me on that. And so he assigned us a major research paper, and met with a few of us in his office. It was going to be probably 80% of our grade. Uh-huh. And he says, so Mr. Katz, how you doing on your paper? I said, and he knew me by then. I had long hair, I had a beard. And I said, I haven't chosen a subject. And he knew I didn't care. So he said, all right, just sit there, wait your turn. And he starts talking to a few other students. And it was at that point I get this, literally it was a crazy thought. And it came out of nowhere, I thought. Now I know it came from somewhere. Uh-huh. But I interrupted him. I said, hey, I got an idea. I know what I'm going to write on. I'm going to write on why the Jews at the time of Jesus didn't believe he was the Messiah. And he said, okay, wait your turn. But he came back around, and I think the other guys left. And he said, well, you've got to see what were they expecting. Why didn't they think Jesus fit that portrait? He says, now, I've looked into that myself, so let me warn you, I'll be more critical on your paper than the rest. I didn't have a Bible, but I had to see. That was the source. So I actually stole my first Bible.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why not? I took it from a hotel. I didn't know these guys named Gideons didn't mind.
Gideons want you to steal
That's
the Bible.
Right. Yeah, they planted it there. So I took one, and boy, how did I get into that paper. I was reading books by Jews and Christians and secular historians, and I just had a lot of questions. So that's when that brought us to meet, actually. I made appointments with 2 rabbis and 2 Christian pastors. The reason I looked you up, my girlfriend at the time, her brother Joel, was the bus driver for a music team who had sung at your church. Huh. And he told my girlfriend, who had turned her back on faith and her family, and we got together at that point. Yeah. She was safe with this Jewish boyfriend. And but he told her, Laura, if you ever need help or any kind of advice or whatever, I met this pastor. He's a good guy. Look him up. So when I wanted to interview people, Laura said to me, well, my brother mentioned this one guy. Why don't you call him as one of the pastors?
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. They had sung at the church, I guess.
Yeah.
So I called you, made this appointment, as well as, the other three guys. I had met them too. All four of you tried to be helpful, but you were the only one who really was, to be honest.
Now, let me just pause the conversation right there and say this, that some things in life make us a bit more uncomfortable than others. And this next segment is going to sound a bit self-serving, and I'm only leaving it in because it's his story. It's Steve's perception. I hadn't talked to Steve in many years, and when I heard him start talking about this, I was touched, because you never know, do you, how what you say or how you act might affect positively or negatively someone else. I'm sure that I've done a lot of things in my life that are negatives for other people. This one happened to be a positive, and in spite of my embarrassment, I'm going to let you hear it.
And your first question, I think, or right in the beginning as I was coming in, you said, do you want to ask me these questions for your paper or for Stephen Katz or Steve Katz?
Yeah.
And I got honest with you. I said both. And I think maybe that tipped you off. You had a live one. I don't know. But, it had become a real search. And I was getting really intrigued by what I was discovering. Because in my house, Jesus didn't exist.
Sure.
When my mother said Jesus Christ, you knew it was time. You knew, but get out of the room, because she was mad.
Yeah.
That's the only time I heard his name.
So your journey of faith, or into faith, sort of began in those days before the whole Dylan thing.
Yeah.
The whole, what's the meaning of life?
Yep.
What counts?
Yeah.
So
and I don't know how all of that works.
Right.
I don't know God's ways that well, but he broke into my world. He, I guess, whatever. He does his thing.
Yeah.
And that thought that came into my mind for the subject of the paper was actually in my life, I consider that to be really a supernatural moment.
Wow.
I do.
Wow.
Yeah.
So later on then, some months later, you decided you thought Jesus was Messiah.
Yeah, that about 9 months later, something like that. And there's a whole lot of details between point A and point B, but I wound up receiving him as my Messiah, my Lord, my Savior. Yeah. And
you were saying this thing last night when we were talking about you were baptized and then ran across town.
Yeah. Talk
to us about that real quick.
Sure. So I became a believer in Jesus, received him in May, the end of the month of May, and things had been rocky with my folks. I wasn't very expressive. I was withdrawing. I was cynical. I was not a nice guy. So I figured, let me see if they notice if Jesus makes any difference in my life. So I was living away from home, but I would call them that summer. I love you. I was communicating with them, and they definitely noticed. So I went home for my birthday in September. I told them of my faith. That's a whole nother story how that went. It was pretty tough. They thought I was brainwashed. They thought I was trying to avoid anti-Semitism, all kinds of things. But then I chose to get baptized. After I wanted to tell them first, so I go back down to Champaign-Urbana, and I don't remember, it was October, November by then, and I got baptized. Oh, it must have been October. Okay. Wouldn't have been as late as November, because the high holidays, Jewish high holidays, were rolling around. So I get baptized on Kol Nidre. It's Erev Yom Kippur. That is when the Day of Atonement starts in the evening, the night before, like all Jewish holidays. Yeah. So.
And that's called Kol Nidre?
Kol Nidre, which means all vows. It's the name of a prayer, a very beautiful melody. It's a prayer that's chanted. And actually, it's a kind of a renunciation of vows. And in some streams of Judaism, they think that it's almost for those that were forced to convert to Christianity in the Middle Ages, they could say this prayer and kind of come back, and it would all be undone, like they didn't mean it.
Yeah.
But it probably means other things as well. So there's a little bit of irony there.
Ambiguity.
Yeah. So I stood up. I remember the night I was baptized, and you baptized me. But you gave us each a chance to say a couple words to the congregation. And I said, tonight my family, all over, they're all in services for Kol Nidre, for Yom Kippur. And if they take it at all seriously, they're looking to God to forgive them for their sins. And I'm standing here tonight because I know in Jesus, the Messiah, my sins are forgiven. I had that certainty. And so anyway, so I get baptized, towel dry my hair for a second, and race across town to the Jewish service, the Kol Nidre service, because that's just what I do.
Who you are. Sure.
That's who I was.
Sure.
And I was learning, well, I don't know what it means to be a Jewish guy who believes in Jesus, but this is, I guess, how I work it out.
Why not?
Yeah.
Wow. So what if, just in wrapping this up, Steve, you're married, you have 3 children, all adults.
4 children.
4 children.
Yeah.
All adults.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Had a good day. Yeah.
and looking back over the last 43 years since we met, which that's a long time.
I know.
Yeah, but just in terms of takeaways from what you have discovered about yourself and about God over those years, just you don't, it doesn't have to be 17 things, just maybe
Right.
1 or 2 things that continue to move you. Thoughts.
Yeah.
This can be stream of consciousness without commas.
Okay, good.
Go for it.
It'll be stream of consciousness. Well, one thing is I sometimes feel like God's grace is like water and that I swim in it because I just know how I mess up and how I'm just so human and I'm not some holy man, and I visualize it like it's water, and I just live in it. Yeah. So I'm so grateful for God is so much bigger than I can envision him.
Yeah.
And I've seen things that could be called miracles, I suppose, but a lot of times I've seen times where I wish there was one and there wasn't one, and there've been a lot of. It's not an easy walk, but it's a fulfilling. It's answered my deepest questions. My faith. I was looking for meaning in life, and he showed me meaning in life, and it's loving him, it's loving people.
I remember the conversation with you. I don't remember the parts like you remember the parts.
Yeah.
But to sit with you 43 years after the fact and say, what a delightful thing, these like an airplane touching and going when they're practicing that, to have a touch and go moment that counts for now and for the long haul is so wonderful to reflect on, and I'm grateful for you.
Well, thank you. It's a
Chicago.
delight to be here with you. Yeah, this is great.
Thank you, Steve. God
All right.
bless.
You too.
Bye-bye. So there you have it. One man's journey of faith. And the roots that he comes from are unique. All of us are rooted uniquely, whether it's our ethnicity, our political fabric, our religious or theological constructs, the geography from which we come, the size of the family and the kind of family, whether it's whole or broken or fractious, whatever. It all shapes how we see ourselves. And that's really the question of this podcast today. Where do I find the essence of my identity? Steve and I have found ours in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, this Jewish carpenter cum rabbi executed by the state 2,000 years ago, but who still lives in our hearts, if you will. But my question for you as we end this time is, so who are you? I had the privilege of speaking to a faculty group a few weeks back up in the Northwest. It was a university that's faith-based, and I said, I have a question for you, and I have a statement for you. And my question was, so who are you? And the statement was, I believe this school year, you individually will be answers to some student's prayer. That's what I believe. There is something about having our identity rooted beyond us, beyond this world, that gives a range and a reach and a power that is like no other. Steve Katz found that out sitting in the office of a rhetoric professor at the University of Illinois when he decided on a topic for a paper. I think that's a unique way to start authenticating one's identity, but all of us can have similar stories. So thank you for listening. It's been a great time with you. See ya.